Okay, it is Monday, March the 7th, 2022, and it's 7 o'clock p.m. And welcome to week number 5, week 5 of Introduction to Criminal Law. I'm Professor Richard Wright, and I'm going to go over the details of the assignments for this week and encourage you to make sure that you follow the rubrics once again. I'm not going to repeat the stuff that I've talked about already. You should by now know that I grade heavily on the rubrics and what's in the module. And you're also aware that if you need me, how to reach me. Any hour except the 25th hour of the day, you can text me, call me, or email me. My phone number is 630-660-8480. So let's go ahead and let's get started and share my screen. Okay, so let's take a look at the calendar. Once again, you'll see that we are rapidly approaching the finish line. Today is the 7th, our live lecture. Your initial post due tomorrow, the 8th, and your reply post due the 12th, Saturday. And then your live classroom phrase that I give you, or word, is due on the 13th, as well as your written assignment. And then next Monday is it. That's the last week, the last week of classes. And so you know the deal now. All right, let's go. Oh, and you're aware that the course ends a week from Friday, which is the 18th, not the 19th, not the 20th. That's the final time that you'll see that. Let's go back into the course. Let's take a look at the announcements for this week. So this week we're going to talk about crimes against moral values, and chapter 7 of the textbook. I sent you the corresponding PowerPoints for your studying. Remember what I said? Chapter 6, chapter 7, not chapter 6, weeks 4, which we just completed, weeks 5, which we're doing now, and then week 6, you have the final exam. Okay, so complete the activity: drug laws, drunk driving, distracted driving, hate crimes, and then look at the key terms, and we do the practice stuff at the end as well. Okay, so your discussion assignment is drunk driving. Again, the deadline is initial post tomorrow night and the reply post Saturday. Finally, your written assignment is: has a hate crime been committed? And I'll go over the parameters of that, and that's due this Sunday along with the key phrase. Okay, so let's get out of that. Let's go right to the module. So the discussion assignment, drunk driving, you're going to take this fact pattern up here, and you're going to read it, and then you're going to answer the following: has the crime of drunk driving or drugged driving been committed? And if so, by the male, the female, or both? Explain your position in detail. Explain what enforcement action that you would take. What would you do with the truck? Your reply post: examine the other students' posts and then defend your position regarding the questions raised there. Okay, so you want to get that done. Now let's look at the written assignment. Has a hate crime been committed? So we're going to deal with, as it says, moral values, which include victimless crimes of drug and alcohol abuse, which I don't know if they're victimless or not, but you'll understand why I say that as I go through the lecture. And then hate crimes against certain classes of people. As you probably should be aware, that hate crimes are on the rise in this country. As you can recall, the Asian Americans, the Jews, and African Americans, and one of the most recent cases where hate crime was involved was down in Brunswick, Georgia, in the Ahmaud Arbery case, where the federal court had a trial and the jury found the three individuals guilty of a hate crime. And it was manifested and demonstrated because uh, of their, uh, their use of the N word constantly referring to African Americans. And so that did that. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to, so for part, this is a two-part, actually it's a three-part assignment. So you're going to go from different perspectives, and I've been in these shoes. So in the first scenario, you're going to use that scenario, and then you're going to complete this. Now, it should be a minimum of 1 page. A minimum of 1 page. I repeat, a minimum of 1 page, double spaced. Explain whether or not the elements of a hate crime have been met. Explain one other crime that may have been committed and how were the elements of the crime satisfied. Okay? You're going to do this from the police officer's perspective. Okay? Remember, I would label my sections so that I'll know. Then the next page, which is a minimum of 1 page, you're going to use as defense attorney these facts here. Don't use up here. Use these facts for this scenario and address in a minimum of 1 page, same way, what elements must the state prove to demonstrate that this was a hate crime? What strategies would you use to show that Luke didn't intentionally target the victims? Remember, you're doing it from the defense attorney perspective. Part 3, detective. So you analyze it from the perspective of detective. Same parameters. Deal with this scenario, a minimum of 1 page. To complete this assignment, address it in the minimum of 1 page. Define femicide. Do not use the dictionary. I repeat, do not use the dictionary. Do some research. Explore a hate crime law and determine if cases of femicide are hate crimes, and if not, why or why not. Use citations in the body for each scenario. You do not have to have but one reference page for all three. Remember, it's APA citation and the format requirements. Make sure, it's very important, cite your sources. Don't just rely on the textbook or the module. Okay? And it must be in a Word document. It must have a cover page as well. So when I read this, I'm going to be looking to see, did you do 1 page for each one? If you did a half a page for one or the other, you're going to get dinged for that, okay, in the rubric. All right. So here's the rubric. Again, it's a different rubric, you know, than the one that you're seeing in other classes. So it's pretty, mine is pretty straightforward. I just have the excellent. If you want to get all the points, you want to take care of this. You want to take care of this. See the 1 page, and I would take off points. And then your grammar, spelling, and APA. If you don't have APA, you're going to end up losing all your points. Okay? You're going to make sure you have this, all right, paragraphs properly written. Very important. Okay? So those are your written assignments for the week. Then your lab classroom word or phrase here. So we're going to talk about drug laws, drunk and drug driving, distracted driving, hate crimes. Those are the 4 topics that we're going to talk about, and then we'll go over this, and then we'll call it a day. All right. So drug laws. As you should be aware, if you take drugs and crime, which is a J250 that I teach, and some of you are in both of those classes, it is a very serious offense, and that the laws are actually there to protect addicts for the most part, to protect addicts, protect people who are hooked on drugs. So it is a moral decision to use drugs. However, it is not exactly that. It's more of a health issue, because once you start on these drugs, you find yourself hooked, and the drug takes over your will. You don't have a free will anymore. And so the laws are there to primarily require people to get help, number one. And number two, there's also there, well, maybe number one, to deal with what we call a war on drugs, where we try to give extended sentences, long-term sentences, seizing property for individuals who are dealers or distributors on a large level. So drugs, like alcohol, are ingested by people. But remember, one of the things that I will always say in drugs and crime, and I'll say it here, is that individuals commit crimes to support their drug habits. And because of their addiction or illness, as I like to refer to it, they'll commit robberies, thefts, and other activities to use uh, to get the money for the habit. So in the 1900s, the Uniform Controlled Substance Act of 1970 classified drugs into schedules, 5 different schedules, and here they are. And the lower the schedule number, the more potent, more serious the drugs. For example, you have it says heroid, but it's heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and marijuana. Now, somebody might say, well, why is marijuana on there? Because it's now becoming legal. But here is the problem, good people. The marijuana that is being legalized is not the same quantity or quality, I should say, of marijuana that you would buy on the streets. Because what you should be aware of is that the distributors of these drugs lace it with all kinds of dangerous chemicals. I mean, they use acid, battery acid from lithium batteries. They use uh, things such as Drano, drain cleaner, cough medicine, syrup, and they mix it with um, drugs that are used to put large animals like um, elephants and hippos to sleep in this marijuana, and people smoke it, and it creates problems for them. So there's a high potential for abuse. It says no accepted medical use and a lack of demonstrated safety under medical supervision for these drugs. Schedule 2, the next level, you got oxycodone, fentanyl, opium, and cocaine. You should be aware that we are in a opioid um, epidemic. We got a pandemic, but we got that epidemic going on, where individuals are finding themselves elevating to take oxycodone, opium, and cocaine. Again, remember, these things do things to your mind. And so um, it creates abuse by individuals. Then we get to the lower schedules. Then you start to see painkillers like Tylenol, codeine, anabolic steroids. So they can affect your mental state and you can become dependent. And then we get to the lower ones, physical or mental dependence on Valium, painkillers, as you can see here. And then 5, the least potential for physical or psychological cough suppressants, codeine, though you saw codeine up here, but it fits here as well. So these drugs are violent in nature, and as I said earlier, we came out with the war on drugs, which was declared by President Reagan in the 80s, and said we should just say no, or you should just say no. But you should be aware, as I said before, it's not as easy as saying no when you are controlled by the drug. So today, we're still continuing with the war on drugs, and it exists where there's all kinds of illicit drugs being distributed and sold. And we also have different approaches now. So dealing with marijuana regulation and drug court versus incarceration. So what we're doing is we're moving towards what we call deflection. If you take the, again, I keep referring to it intermittently, the drugs and crime course, we talk about how law enforcement is reached a stage to try to help individuals. And we deal with it from the standpoint of providing drugs that when people OD, such as Narcan or Noxolone, to arrest the effects of the drugs and to try to save that person's life. But the biggest thing is that we have drug court, and I spend a lot of time as a lawyer. Drug courts are usually in the evening, and what we do is try to encourage individuals as part of a plea to get some help, because that's the only way it's going to change. Okay, so the Uniform Controlled Substance Act um, uh, created laws, allowed laws to be stated and set up in various or countries, various states, to deal with the possession, delivery, or sales of illicit drugs. Okay. So let's talk about that now. You got uniform control laws. From the criminal perspective, there are two kinds of possessions. There's what we call actual possession. That's when you have physical control of the drug, such as in your pocket or something like that. And constructive is where it's in a place where you have the ability to control them, such as maybe your home or either in your car. Okay. So possession of a controlled substance, according to the Ohio statute, is possession of a controlled substance from knowingly possessing it. Remember, constructive or actual, a controlled substance, which one that fits under those schedules, or a controlled substance analog, which analogs are not listed above, but they are as dangerous and they are made of chemicals. And it's similar to the Schedule 1 or 2 drugs, but they have names like K2 or Spice. And the thing that people should be aware of is that when people take these controlled substance analogs, you could buy them online. You can Google and you can see it. You buy it in some of these convenience stores. They look like candy. And so the jurisdictions across the country have laws that deal with that. I was a village attorney and a police officer in a town called Ford Heights, which is the south suburbs of Chicago, which was known as the crack cocaine capital of the south suburbs. And we dealt with the issue of individuals who were using drugs and distributing drugs, primarily crack cocaine, which was a cheap high. Okay. So you could be held responsible for criminal acts if you deliver it. Now, what happens, unfortunately, is that the quantity that you have could be an amount that you deliver as a person who's a user who sells. And what you do is you use it, but you sell it to make the money to pay for the drugs that you got from the drug dealer. So you're kind of put in an indentured servant situation where you're not free, and that you sell the drugs or else. That's pretty much the way it is. And so we have laws that specifically protect our schools, but you should be aware that these days we're finding that the drugs are even brought to school by the kids. My daughter is in a middle school. She's 13 years old and in 8th grade. The police came with dogs and they found drugs in lockers of students. And so it's more severe when adults or a person sells drugs on school grounds, or as it says, within 1,000 feet of a child care facility or a school, a public, private, or middle school or elementary school, and or 1,000 feet of a state, county, or municipal park, a place where kids hang out. That's pretty much what they're saying. So controlled substances put you at risk of long-term addiction and self-harm, but it also puts all of us at a risk of harm when individuals also get behind the wheel of a vehicle, driving, but also um, from crimes that are committed against people to get the drugs, right? So that's about what that's. So distracted driving. So what is that? You can see it right here. What is it? It means what it says. Activity that takes the attention of the driver away from driving, such as texting the phone. People didn't know this. Eating and drinking, or talking to people in your vehicle, messing with the radio or GPS or navigation system, whatever takes your attention away from the road. And all it takes is a split second. And as a result, there's been a high number of accidents that have taken place. And I'm not talking about people who are under the influence. They're just simply driving while doing too many things. That's why hands-free phones are usually the rule in most jurisdictions. Um, but you know, I tell people, even with hands-free phones, what it is you can drive focused on. Have you ever driven a car, and in driving that car, you forgot how you got from point A to point B? I mean, you didn't even think about it. So you were driving almost like you're in a trance. Well, that can come about because of the fact too that people are involved in distracted driving. You see the young lady with the phone in her hand, and they're about to get into an accident. And it talks about in this section how teen drivers are guilty and high levels of texting while driving. It only takes a second, and a person can be injured or killed. All right. The key thing is you try to talk as little as you possibly can. I have an issue. I noticed that a lot of GPSs are in cars, but they've designed them so that you can look at the road and be able to see your directions at the same time. However, that's a divided focus. And I remember I used to see these big screens up there, look like TVs, and people um, look at those things. But look at what it says: an electronic device includes handheld personal digital assistants or portable mobile computer. But it does not, listen to this, it does not include global positioning sensors or navigation systems or device that is physically electronically integrated into the vehicle itself. Like my car, for example, I have a navigation system, but my navigation system, again, allows me to look at it and keep my eyes on the road. Many jurisdictions, including my home state, Illinois, have increased um, um, the laws if a driver results in great bodily harm, permanent disability, disfigurement, and was an approximate cause, the entry of death, because the person was driving, maybe distracted or doing something they weren't supposed to. Did you know loud music can also do the same? So you have distracted driving along with drunk driving. That's when you really have a problem. When you find individuals who drive under the influence of drugs and or alcohol, and uh, you need to be careful about your choices. There's many medications that individuals take, and it has warnings on there that tell you um, be careful about taking these drugs when you're driving. All right. So it's to protect the public. All right. So now let's go back and let's pick up drugged and drunk driving. So drunk driving is driving under influence of alcohol. Okay. And people um, can find themselves thinking they can drive a car, be in control, and um, you don't realize your response time slows down with the drink. And so originally, when I first started practicing law, if you had to take a breath test and you blew 0.10, then you were considered to be illegally driving a vehicle. However, because of the tremendous number of accidents that were taking place, the law changed later to a blood alcohol of 0.08, and you were then deemed to be impaired, and you could be driving under the influence, and accidents and crashes take place. All of our states contain the elements of operating a vehicle on a highway or road, parking lot, look at parking lot, or driveway accessible to the public while impaired with alcohol. So if you're sitting in your car under the in a driveway, are you driving under influence? The answer is yes. And one of the things that is next determined that you're in physical control. Physical control is defined as being in the driver's position of a vehicle, or if the driver's position of a streetcar or a trolley, and having possession of the ignition keys or other ignition devices. The reason why it's other ignition devices now is that you can have a button that you push. Like in my car, I don't, I have my keys, they're in my pocket or somewhere sitting in the car. But I start my car by putting my foot on the brake and pushing this button, and that's how it starts. So if I'm driving under the influence and physical control of that vehicle, it's by having the ability, even if you haven't started it. you still have the ability. Okay. And it's a very serious offense. People are killed every year. Um, uh, and if a person does die, a homicide, which is simply, as I said in previous weeks, the killing of another individual. And so if you do it with the use of intoxicated alcohol and you're driving under the influence, the state has to prove that the person was operating a motor vehicle. I've already described that, under the influence with a blood alcohol content, BAC, of at least 0.08, or by observation if the driver is considered impaired and causes the death of another. Okay. All right, and there's field sobriety tests that you take and on the road that the police can put you through to determine whether or not you are um, under the influence. So observations of driving behavior. So if you're weaving, driving through a traffic signal, striking a curb. I've seen all of these. Look at the physical appearance of this guy. If there's an odor of alcohol, if you have red or bloodshot eyes or slurred speech. I know of a person, though, that was driving and they thought the person was driving under influence because they had slurred speech in their eyes. But what they discovered was that, and the person smelled like alcohol, but instead they were having a stroke and they were driving. Okay. There was a judge, actually, I knew. So here are the field sobriety tests where they have you touch your nose, walk the line. They have what they call the horizontal gauge, the walk and turn, the one leg stand. You know, it's based on balance, and you can take a look at these by looking at these in here. So be aware that when you drive your car, you give what we call implied consent. And drivers are given the option to consent to the chemical test. And it means that if you operate a vehicle, you're implicitly saying, I agree to take the test if you ask. And if you don't take the test, penalties are increased if you refuse. And if you refuse and law enforcement officers wish to proceed with evidence, they must get a warrant. So if you deny them of that. Since the case of Warren of Missouri versus McNeely, a 2013 case, which you can take a look at. Before McNeely came about, law enforcement officers could force blood draws in drunk driving. In other words, they can force you to do it. But the McNeely said that was too invasive and that before it can be done, a warrant is required to force a blood draw. And in some cases, unless some exigent circumstances that may require immediate action can be established, but it's a serious burden. Most officers don't like to get into that. So we conclude this section talking about drugged driving. Driving, as I talked about earlier, under the influence of alcohol is one, but drugs, legal or illegal drugs, when the drug itself will lower the ability of the person to respond. Their response time is slowed down. And there are tests that can be done. And so you can test that individual to see if they're driving under the influence of drugs. Here's a video which I refer you to take a look at if you want to learn more about that. But pay attention to this Missouri versus McNeely case. It's very important. If I say something's very important, I mean it. So we've done drug laws. We've done drug driving, distracted driving. So we're going to conclude by talking about hate crimes. And I already shared with you earlier that hate crimes are on the rise. There was federal legislation before states. And what that meant is it was clear that the reason why you committed the crime against the individual was because of that person's sexual orientation, gender, or disability, or race, religion, or national origin. So the point of the matter is LGBT people are protected because of sexual orientation, uh, and gender, ideally transgenders, or if a person is disabled and they're uh, beaten because of that or injured. So many states, 45 at this time of the 50 states, passed hate crime laws. And those laws are on the books. And they were already on the federal level, but now they're on the state. So when a person commits crimes that would normally be regular criminal acts in the jurisdiction, such as battery, robbery, which we talked about those, vandalism, or arson, if you indicate something to the effect that that person, you did it, and mention the race of that individual. As I was telling you about that case that concluded down in Brunswick, Georgia. Now, it's not real easy, but it has to be established that it was an intentional act of that person in whole or in part because of race, religion, color, disability, sexual orientation, national origin, or ancestry, whether or not they were correct or not about it. Oftentimes, you hear it spoken out, and the words is what happens. If a person indicates that they're going to attack that person who's disabled because they're in a wheelchair, or they're going to attack a person because of their sex or race and chase down. As you look at Wisconsin versus Mitchell, where the defendant, Mitchell, an African American, was sentenced to 2 additional years in prison. So they add more time if it goes to the level of a hate crime. And for intentionally targeting against a white victim and vice versa. But Mitchell's intent to target the white victim was established by his words, as I was talking about earlier. And this is what he said: "There goes a white boy, go get him." That will lead to hate crimes every time, just before the person was battered. So Mitchell argued that the penalty violated his free speech rights. The Supreme Court disagreed, as rightfully so, and concluded that his right to free speech ended when he carried out the act. Say it, but don't do it. Free speech, even though it says vile thoughts are protected, they may violate hate crime laws when there's action that takes place. So you can read this case. All right. And that's it. Okay. So now let's go and see some practice tests. So if you go down here, and it talks about in the reading, consider this scenario, and then you can practice that, and you can learn about Missouri versus McNeely. So that's how you can learn about blood draws. Remember what I said? You got to have a warrant. Key terms. These are terms that we've discussed: actual possession, constructive, controlled substance, analog, illegal per se, physical control of a vehicle. All of these, every single one of these, pay attention so that you will be aware of what is going to take place. All right. And then the drug schedule, so you can learn about what the drug schedule is. There's a practice for you here, and you can go and you can start this activity. It's a practice, and what you're going to do is you're going to click each one of these drugs that have no accepted medical use in the United States. See if you can attach it to this. Drugs that may lead to limited physical or psychological dependence, and you attach to each schedule, and then you submit it, and it'll tell you whether you're right or wrong. All right, so you can practice that on your own. And then I'm gonna say it like one more time, the practice quiz. I say it every time. These quizzes show up on the exam. So according to the federal law, marijuana is a what drug with a high potential for abuse? And it's actually a 1, even though it's changing, but it is a 1 right now. And you saw that earlier. You are a police officer and you stopped a motor vehicle for speeding. While you're standing along the open driver's side window, you smell the burnt marijuana coming from the vehicle. Search reveals marijuana in the center console. Driver says it's not his. You may still take enforcement because the driver is in what? Possession of marijuana. Which one? You stopped it, you smelled burnt marijuana, and a search reveals marijuana in the center console. So what is it? Is it actual, partial, or absolute? How about this one? Occurs when a person has a right ability to control. Remember, it's their vehicle, or it could be their home. While searching a man who is under arrest for a warrant, you locate a substance that is believed to be homemade chemical properties such as ecstasy. Okay, this is considered a controlled substance analog. That's what it is, similar to a 1 or 2, remember that. Incident to a lawful arrest. You search Jane and you find cocaine in her front left pants pocket. She says it's not hers while stating that they aren't my pants. But she's wearing them, right? You still arrest Jane because this is an example of actual possession. Yeah. All right. So those are some of the questions that you might find. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to give you a key phrase that is important to the law, and I've discussed it several times today, and that's hate crimes. Give me hate crimes, and you'll have your points. That's the key phrase, hate crimes. So I'm going to say good night to you. I'll see you next week for the final week. Stay safe. Take care of yourself. Good night.